It doesn't even notice me. I'm putting out all the signals. Eye contact, positive body language.
Have you tried, I don't know, talking to her?
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Master of None here. Today I want to ask you all a question. Do you think the living world was a mistake? In one of my Return to GW2 videos, I talked about how living world episodes back in the day often felt like something I completed in a couple of hours and then went back to dungeon and fractal farming. Since coming back to the game, I've not touched a single quote-unquote endgame instance yet, which is crazy to me because for many years most of my in-game hours were spent in dungeons and fractals. After releasing that video, it really got me thinking. My perception of the living world after a long GW2 break is very different from the one I used to have. To get to the bottom of this, I want to start with how the living story was implemented after the release of the base game. The initial idea was pretty cool on paper, a constantly evolving world that you want to be part of because it is changing. It was part of the name, the living story, an organic, breathing thing that would constantly change the world you were playing in. However, it didn't take very long until the flaws of this system became overly apparent, and the repercussions of it can be felt even to this day. It is hard to build upon story that isn't accessible anymore. Season 1 was very unfriendly to new players, or even to players that just took a break, since you got thrown in wherever the story was right there and then. Due to this, you had very little context and understanding of what was going on, which led to you ultimately being way less interested and invested in the story. It almost seemed like it was there to create FOMO, which in my opinion clashed heavily with the core philosophies of the game. One of the greatest aspects of Guild Wars 2 is arguably that it respects your time, probably more than any other MMO out there. So it's not surprising that for Season 2, ArenaNet switched to story content that would stay in the game even if it wasn't current anymore. The initial idea was to never have an expansion and instead have a constant stream of free updates. Again, I think the idea is commendable and it sounds good on paper, but there is something no living world update was yet able to recreate, and that is the expansion hype. I'm speaking from my own experiences here. Heck, this whole YouTube channel got created because I got so excited by a new Guild Wars 2 expansion, and I wanted to talk about it to more people than just a couple friends. Living World never did this. Even worse, back then, the Living World updates sometimes made my view on the game worse. It felt like I would be waiting for an update for 2 or 3 months, and then when it finally came out, I'd finish the story within an hour or two and go back to my routine, since it initially didn't come with a lot of replayable content. I remember clearly feeling like the living world didn't change up the way I played the game at all, leading to frustration. Coming back to the game and getting presented with a huge amount of content at once made me feel very different about the seasons. They actually felt like a good chunk of content. Multiple maps with tons of story and a lot of achievements to go for. Also, getting to play them back to back made me automatically less focused on some of the worst episodes, since in the end it was the bigger picture that counted. This has been especially apparent in the Icebrut Saga. I just finished everything except the finale. A lot of people were warning me about how bad it was, and honestly, playing through it in one go, it wasn't nearly as bad as I had expected. The maps are gorgeous and varied, and there is still so much left for me to discover. Drizzlewood has had me confused and intrigued with the amount of stuff that is going on there and its world versus world feel. The Biora Marches showed that Guild Wars shouldn't be afraid to go darker here and there, and Gruthmar Valley, well, is my favorite zone in the game.
He keeps staring at me. Seriously, everywhere I go, he's there. It's really creeping me out.
Even though the Icebrut Saga story in itself felt a lot less cohesive than Season 4 up until now, I still had a decent time with it. Of course, no one can say if things would have looked differently if instead of getting years of living world, we would have gotten them bundled together as expansions, but I would like for you to just imagine it for a second. I've mentioned multiple times that I think Living World Season 4 is some of the best story content ANET has ever created. However, I remember when the first episode was released, I was never hyped for it. I appreciate it so much more now, the second time through, being able to just play through it at my own speed and really experiencing it and getting overwhelmed by the abundance of content. It felt like actual expansion content. So I wonder how things would have been different if we'd gotten Season 4 as an expansion instead. I know that I personally would have returned much sooner. It even came with 2 new mounts, great maps with each having their own little progression system, and a legendary trinket that made you spend even more time in those maps if you really wanted it. One thing is for sure, it was certainly a lot more replayable than Path of Fire was. It's no secret that GW2 doesn't have much of a representation outside the game. People are often surprised to hear that this game is still alive and kicking. Having more regular expansion releases would at the very least bring more outside press to the game. In my personal opinion, I think we are getting way too many patches in between expansions. I would much rather see just a prologue with a map that is slowly expanding, similar to the Silver Wastes, and instead get a huge content drop in the form of an expansion more regularly. There are pros and cons to both approaches. The main one being that the quote-unquote content drops would probably be longer. However, I think just knowing that there is an expansion coming in a couple months already has such a positive impact on the game. I want to play Guild Wars 2 right now and not wait until February when EOD launches. I'm making all these goals for myself that I want to achieve before the expansion. This would not be the case if End of Dragons wasn't announced. I think there's even a high probability that I would not be playing at the moment at all. I'm really curious what you guys think about this, so please let me know in the comments below. Would you prefer having more expansions and less living world? Or do you like the way Anent is doing things right now? I've already hinted at the fact that this series is coming to an end during the last video. I'll talk about what this exactly means for the series and the channel next week Wednesday. But until then, I wish you all a wonderful time and I hope to see you in the next one.